what is it you want to achieve in life? What's the difference between where you are and where you want to be? What things do you need to do now, do differently to help you get where you want to go? I mean, you mentioned, I think in the last episode, what got you here is not necessarily what's going to get you there. Mm-hmm. And so that's a conversation you have often with clients.
Welcome to the Execs.Coach podcast. Are you a business leader or someone with aspirations of improving your leadership skills? If you're looking to uncover what it takes to be a successful leader in today's environment, listening to the Execs.Coach podcast will be well worth the investment of your time. Now, let's jump into the conversation with Executive Coach Ed Rankin and serial entrepreneur Doug Parker.
All right, we are back for the Execs.Coach podcast. I'm Doug Parker.
I'm Ed Rankin.
We're going to talk about coaching today, okay? We're going to talk about coaching. We're going to talk about consulting, advising, mentoring, the differences between those, some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, the old SWOT analysis. But Ed, in the last episode, we talked about how coaching is not just telling somebody what to do. It's not just the drawing out on a board, hey, here's what you go do. It's that the people, they kind of already know that's being coached. They know the answers, but it's the coach's responsibility to kind of help guide them and extract that information out of them, right?
Yes. Yeah, coaching, and probably the best source of information about the coaching profession would be the International Coaching Federation, which is the largest professional association representing coaches globally. And the International Coaching Federation, the ICF, the last several years has spent a lot of time, money, and energy in sort of defining what the core competencies of coaching are. And largely the coach is there as a facilitator with an individual. The coach is there to help the individual discover their goals, objectives, their internal drives. So much of what we do in our lives is we suppress a lot of our thoughts and our emotions, and so this stuff gets pushed down into the unconscious or subconscious. And coaching is a way of drawing those thoughts and feelings out so that they can be examined in a more cognitive way.
Yeah, I know there's a million times where I'm talking to somebody over the years. I mentioned, I've had lots of employees over the years. And man, I feel like I'm real good at telling them about their situation, whether it's them talking about their personal life or whatever. And I'm like, hey man, here's what you should really do in this situation. And it's because I don't have an emotional dog in the hunt. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's easy, seemingly a little bit more easy to say, here's what you should do. And I probably know a lot of things, whether it's with my own spouse or with my own business. If I pull myself out of it to give myself some coaching, it might be easy. The problem is that's not how we do it. We're playing with live ammunition. And if you don't have somebody coaching you or giving you advice or direction, you get emotionally involved. You've got your, kind of just your own ego, and sometimes, people will say things to you, and it puts you in a position where you feel like you got to respond, or and you're reacting in this situation, and it really puts you in a weird position. So, getting that coaching is always good. So, but let's talk about the difference between, coaching maybe versus consulting, and then we'll talk about the other two in just a moment. What would you say is the primary difference between coaching and consulting?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think coaching, consulting is really more about, if you hire a consultant because that consultant has experience or knowledge that you don't have, right? Okay. So you want that consultant to come in and advise you, tell you through the benefit of their knowledge or their experience to help you deal with specific situations. And coaching, the coach is not involved in giving advice. Okay. In fact, the coach would enter the ICF criteria. The coach would really be criticized for giving advice. This is we talked about last episode, one of the biggest challenges for new coaches is not to give advice and learn not to do that. So, but I think, I look at consulting as more of a knowledge transfer, and in coaching is more of it's a communal act between two people where one person is acting as the coach is acting as facilitator to help the coachee, the client, discover their thoughts, feelings, emotions, goals, etc.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so you talked about ICF. Now, is that a place where folks go? Who would use that website?
Well, I think it's a great source of information for anybody that's interested in coaching in general.
Okay.
But certainly for coaches, there's lots of training available there. There's some stuff that's available, some training that's available for free, and there's also there are links to providers who provide coaching skills training for coaches. I'm an accredited coach for the ICF, and to maintain that accreditation, I have to complete so many hours of training every 3 years, and resubmit that. So there's a lot of professional development that's required of coaches in order to continue that certification.
Gotcha. Because there's a lot of people out there that claim to be coaches. I see them, on TikTok and Facebook and the different places, and it's like it's amazing. I think somebody did a spin on that. I saw an insurance commercial where it was like this nice peaceful area, and then he's like, yeah, I just really love this place. I hope it doesn't, a bunch of people don't come in and just run it. And then like the next 10 seconds later, it's like, I'm here, I'm a coach, and I'm just manifesting, greatness. And it's like, there's a lot of people that say they're a coach, but maybe they really aren't an accredited coach. And so that's a place where you can get the accreditation.
Yes, and actually, Doug, for people who are interested in finding a coach, the ICF is a good place to go. On their website, you can do a search and find a coach, maybe in your area, or a coach that specializes in some area of coaching that maybe you want. So, for example, their health and wellness is an area where a lot of people are coaching today. And what we've learned so I have a good friend who was she was a physician at the local emergency room physician at a local hospital, and also a professor at one of the local medical university. And what they found is that they have people come into the emergency room with a heart attack, and they'd be really unhealthy. They would keep them in the hospital for a day or two. They do the intervention surgeries, put a new stent in, or whatever they need to do, roto-rooter the veins out and arteries. And then they send a person home with a list of things to do, medications to take, diet and all that, exercise regimen. Well, 4 or 5 months later, about half of those patients are back again. Same thing. They didn't get their medication. They didn't change their lifestyle, so they continue to have problems with hearts. So what they've been doing now is signing coaches to those people when they leave the hospital. They'll get a call from a coach who will follow up with them. Have you gotten your prescriptions filled? Do you understand your medications? What you plan on doing when you're changing your lifestyle, or you're looking at changing your diet? Are there some exercises that you find that attract? So, and what that's done is cut recidivism down by like 50%.
Whoa.
Yeah. Okay. So there are some areas in coaching where there's some really wonderful cost-benefit analyses that you can look at.
Absolutely. Well, and if you missed anything that we're talking about here, maybe you're driving down the road, or maybe it's just something where it's going so fast. If you're like me, I like to listen to stuff on like 1.2 or 1.5. So if you missed anything, you can always go to Execs.Coach. We'll put it in the notes, in the show notes down at the bottom. So just make sure to go to Execs.Coach, not .com, but .coach, and we'll dial in all this information there. So you talked about the ICF and how it's more coaching, and how that's not really consulting. Consulting might be where you've got a subject matter expert. So like my background is in financial services or in the energy space. Maybe someone would hire somebody like me, even though I'm not a certified coach at this point, but maybe I could do consulting with them because I know that industry inside and out. I'm a content matter expert in those industries, and I can give them some input and maybe tell them what to do. Hey, here's what you're doing. Here's what you're doing wrong. Here's how I would do it. That's a consultant.
Correct.
And then a coach maybe comes in. They may or may not have experience in that particular industry, but they've got experience in coaching individuals and coaching them up on how to deal with situations, really uncovering and exposing things that are going on, and the people, as you mentioned multiple times, they probably already know what to do deep down. They just need some help kind of pulling it out of their inner in their mind and their subconscious. Okay, so then you've got advising, and then you've got mentoring. Okay, so I hear a lot of people talk about my mentor is this and my mentor is that. That's a real squishy term, but I think mentoring is important. One of the things that I've seen posted, many times is basically never take advice from someone that doesn't have the things that you want. Okay, so if you're taking, if you got a mentor for your marriage and they've been divorced 4 or 5 times, okay, that's normally not a good thing. And I've always heard learn from other people's successes, not from other people's mistakes, because who wants to learn from some loser that doesn't know they know how not to do it. I can learn from my own mistakes. It hurts, okay, but I'd rather learn from people that are successful, that are making it happen. So When it comes to mentoring, kind of what are your thoughts on that? I know you're really an executive coach is what you're focused on now, but can you talk about mentoring at all?
Yeah, and I have helped companies set up mentoring programs. So there's a mentoring, and it doesn't have to be a formal structured program, but mentoring typically has some of the elements of coaching, but mentoring would include more advice giving, would include more consulting, advising, where the individual, the mentor and mentee, the mentor is there to really do everything he or she can do to help their mentee be successful. And so they may include some elements of coaching in their conversations with the person, but they're more directly involved and they're more wedded to the outcome.
Okay.
So in a coach, I should not really be wedded to the outcome. The outcome that I want is whatever outcome the client wants.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So can you give us an example of that? Let's talk about that a little bit. So I hire you as a coach for me. What does that process look like of the outcome? I mean, you're asking me some questions, or how does that work?
Yeah, typically, it's a little bit like usually when I'm introduced to a potential client, I want to find out, in addition to their background, their experience and all that, I want to know what is it in their life that they're not getting that they want.
Okay.
And so part of that would be setting up some goals with the client. So my questions and conversation with the client would be more around, what is it you want to achieve in life? What's the difference between where you are and where you want to be? What things do you need to do now, do differently to help you get where you want to go? I mean, you mentioned, I think in the last episode, what got you here is not necessarily what's going to get you there. Mm-hmm. And so that's a conversation that you have often with clients in coaching is, and sometimes, we rely too heavily on our previous successes and the skills that got us there. We've relied on those, but those aren't the skills that are going to be necessary to get us to the next level. Typically, like this happens a lot with young executives, because a lot of young executives are rewarded, rightly so, for getting things done and achieving things. But they reach a level where now their individual contribution is not really what's important. It's how effective are they at leading a larger group of people. Mm-hmm. So they shift from becoming an individual an individual performer, to leading a group of people. So the skills are very different.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that. So like from an entrepreneurial standpoint or a solopreneur or whatever the case is, so you get where you're very much a risk taker, right? So there's a lot of entrepreneurs that they'll get out there, they'll go to work, they take massive risks, not because they have nothing to lose, but they're really taking risks that others might not take. There are people that are executives that they'll take the kind of more guaranteed structure in life because it's too much to walk away from. It's too scary to walk away from it because it's too good. I think it's Jim Collins that has a book called Good to Great, and he says that the enemy of greatness is good. So if you're doing good, then it's tough to walk away from doing good. Now if you're doing terrible, it's easy to walk away from being terrible and then try to do something better. But if you're doing good, that is the enemy of greatness because it's just hard to get off that I'm doing okay kind of a mentality. And so as an entrepreneur, what happens is, and I've experienced this firsthand, you're doing good, maybe you even do great. You start doing great, now you turn into, well, I don't want to be a risk taker anymore, or as much.
You have something to lose at that point.
Now you got something to lose, something to protect, and now you're looking at it from a different mentality, and it's kind of like this human nature thing, okay? People by nature, I'm an only child, but people by nature they're just kind of like, it's mine, I want to keep it, okay? And so little babies, I don't even know how babies know how to do this, but when they get toys and you get another kid around them, they say, mine, mine. And I think that's what happens as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as an executive. You kind of get this mine mentality. It's mine, I want to protect it. And that is not what necessarily got you to where you're going. Right. And so if you don't have someone to kind of nudge you or kind of go through it, and explain to you, and maybe pull it out of your brain. It's like there's an abundance mentality, there's scarcity mentality, but still, whenever you've created something from nothing, you kind of want to keep it. It comes in kind of handy. And I saw something the other day that talks about a lot of the successful people in this world that are really successful, they have had massive failure. Okay, they've gone through situations where they've been at the top of the mountain and then they just tumble down it. And then the true sign of success is, can they build it back again? Can you come from nothing, get something, lose it all, and then make it back again? Because not anybody can have success, but a lot of people can have success. But dealing with failure is difficult also. especially when you've had some success. So, so let's kind of, tie in these last couple of things. We talked about mentors and mentees, and I think probably one of the things about that also is that they're not necessarily compensated, right? And mentors and mentees a lot of times are...
Correct. Typically they're not.
Yeah, it's more of like somebody at the work is the more experienced guy, and he's the mentor to the less experienced guy or lady, and they kind of have something in the end because they want to mentor them and help bring them up, but they're on their team or they're part of their company, right? So they have their eyes on what's going on in their own company. But then you talked about advising, and you talked about how probably as a coach, you're not doing as much advising, but with the consulting, it's a lot of advising. Mostly advising. Right. And then with mentoring, there's probably some pretty fair amount of advising on that as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I think we've kind of covered those 4 different types pretty well, Ed. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I can't think of anything, Doug.
Okay.
We've covered it pretty well. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, there's one other thing you had mentioned to me that was when you're coaching someone, you're asking them questions about what their desired outcome is. And I meant to ask you this just a moment ago, but I think everybody would say, well, I want to have more success, I want to make more money, I want to have more time. Like those are like pretty common situations, right?
Yeah,
so
that's very cool.
Zig, I talked about him a little bit earlier, but Zig Ziglar used to talk about people want to be at least reasonably prosperous. They want to be happy, healthy, and at least reasonably prosperous. Okay, happy, healthy, and at least reasonably prosperous. Well, what does happy mean? I don't know. I mean, if you ever seen the movie Tombstone, there's a part in there where one of the guys talk about, a girl asked him, "Hey, are you happy?" He's like, "I'm happy as the next guy." You know what I mean? He's like, what does that really mean? I don't know. Some people are happy, or some people aren't. But how do you identify what somebody's asking for? Because I know I always want to make more money. I mean, that's just a intrinsically motivated. I want to make more money always, no matter how much money I'm making. I absolutely want to be happy, and I want to be more efficient. Some people would say they want to work smarter, not harder. I prefer to work harder, smarter, faster. I mean, I want to do all the above. But how do you identify those things? I know there was a book that I went through, and there's kind of a whole methodology behind that, but can you share just a little bit about that, how you extract that out from somebody, what they're really trying to get accomplished?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of it, I like to do pretty extensive historical interviews with clients to helps me understand kind of how they tick. And also sometimes I will use some psychometric instruments. So like people might, the average person would call them personality tests.
Okay, sure.
That also helps me understand that individual, kind of their drive, how they're hardwired. And Doug, we know now through the brain science that a lot of our behavior is hardwired, especially with guys your age and certainly my age. We've got years and years of processing things in a certain way. And so we tend to react or look at things from a similar perspective. Okay. So part of a coach would be to kind of challenge some of those assumptions, to maybe challenge the framework that the individual client's holding, to see if there's, you've laid out some things you want to accomplish. Like one of the things that I would do with a client that had some specific goals would be to try to help them define what that meant to them. So what does success mean? What does more money mean? How much more money, right? So you try to get a little more granular. Then you can convert some of those things to goals. And then you convert the behaviors, the goals to behaviors. So what specific behaviors can you begin to make that will help you accomplish those objectives? Cool. So a lot of it, most of what we're working on at executive level particularly is around behavior change. Okay. So for example, I'm working with a fellow who's a president, chief operating officer of a large corporation. He's the number 2 guy behind the CEO. The CEO is slated for retirement. The board of directors has some concerns that my client's not being able to step up into that CEO position. He's been an internal operator for years, been very effective at running the business, but they see the CEO as being a more charismatic, more outwardly focused person. So, when you meet this fellow, you can see that he could certainly do those things. It's just not something that he has incorporated in his daily regimen. So for him, it would be more him making specific behavior changes to step into that CEO role. So we've defined what those are. Okay. He's okay with it. And we've got a plan in place for him to begin to execute some of those behaviors so that the board can see it and the external constituents can see it.
Makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I know we're going to do a podcast in the future where we're going to talk a lot about the different types of behavioral things. We're going to talk about some of the testing, some of the different methodology of how you go about determining personalities, as well as kind of the science behind where it comes from. So we'll go over that in a future episode, but we appreciate everybody tuning in today to Execs.Coach podcast. Again, if you missed anything, we're going to put everything in the show notes, so make sure to tune in wherever you get your podcast at. I'm Doug Parker.
I'm Ed Rankin.
Have a great day, everybody.